Hey, what's up? It's your boy Rawk. Why bother with absolutely anything? I'm serious. Think of anything that you could possibly want to do in your life. You can pay somebody else to do it for you. You want to repaint your bedroom? Hire a painter. You want to cook a meal? Go to a restaurant. Pay a chef to do it for you. You want to breathe? That stings because I do have to pay for this and I still can't breathe. That's a nice looking company you have there. Hand it over. In the video game industry, the single most important thing to do as a game development studio is to make and release games. Sure, you could pull a Retro Studios and release a game once every 12 years, but that's just f***ing sadistic. Especially for the big three console manufacturers, Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony, having a calendar filled with consistent releases is really important. And while third-party properties can massively bolster a console's year of games, the most important thing for the big three are first-party releases. But the thing is, video games aren't easy to make. They take time and money and time, so having multiple release every year or so, it takes a lot of planning, resources, and forward thinking. So, when a third-party studio is making a good number of high-quality titles that are being enjoyed by the masses, surely it wouldn't hurt to buy them and have them making games exclusively for you to help you release more titles throughout the year. That's where the concept of the video game buyout comes into play. A big company buying out a smaller studio and having them work on games exclusively for them to publish. This can be seen with non-console manufacturing studios, like with Nordic Games buying out THQ to form THQ Nordic. But to be completely fair, THQ had gone bust by that point, so that was less Nordic Games purchasing another studio and more them purchasing a corpse. EA is also something of a notorious studio splurger. They have a track record of buying a vast amount of smaller studios, but the unfortunate reality is that they usually end up liquidating those companies not long after the merger, and employing their previous development talent in the subsidiaries they feel are more valuable. What I'd like to focus on today are some of the biggest acquisitions by the big three console manufacturers, as their decisions are definitely the ones that have the biggest impact on the industry at large, and also, I don't want to think about the implications of Sega buying Rovio. Because when Sonic the Hedgehog and the Red Angry Bird are under the same roof, that's how worlds end. When it comes to Sony and buying up other video game studios, it's a pretty straightforward tale. One of their first major acquisitions was the developer Naughty Dog. Their first big title was 1996's Crash Bandicoot, which the studio showed to Sony during development, leading to Sony signing on to publish the title for the PlayStation. One of the best-selling games on that console, and to many people, the first thing that comes to mind when they hear the word PlayStation. The original furry. Crash Bandicoot obviously made quite the splash when it released, and Naughty Dog went on to make a number of sequels and spin-offs that would also be published by Sony. But because Universal owned the rights to the IP, they were facing creative restrictions that they just didn't want to deal with. So they approached Sony and said, hey, we don't want to deal with this. Okay. The team were bought by Sony to ensure that for their future IPs, they wouldn't have to work around the demands of the IP owner. The studio would work for the IP owner and could do whatever the hell they pleased. The team went on to create the Jak and Daxter series, the Uncharted series, and most notably, The Last of Us, cementing their place firmly as one of the PlayStation's top contributors. A lot of Sony's buyouts read very similarly to this. Studio makes game that Sony likes, Sony buys them so they can make more games that Sony likes. And this kind of thing happened with Media Molecule, Sucker Punch Productions, Insomniac Games, Valkyrie Entertainment. With so many fantastic and talented studios under their belts, Sony knew they were set when it came to filling out their schedules with more remasters of The Last of Us. Because who doesn't want to not buy this game for the 6th time?
My hand isn't up because I do want to not do that.
Now, Nintendo doesn't really have much in the way of studio acquisitions. They tend to prefer being exclusive friends with benefits rather than just asking people to date them. There are a lot of studios that Nintendo could buy out, such as Retro Studios, the maker of Metroid Prime and the new Donkey Kong Country games, Game Freak and or Creatures Inc., the other two stakeholders in the Pokemon Company, Sora Limited, the studio behind Smash Bros., Intelligent Systems, the makers of Paper Mario and Fire Emblem, the list goes on. But for whatever reason, they just have these studios make games exclusively for them, but still let them function independently as a corporate entity. Which on paper does sound like a pretty sweet deal for these studios. But in the case of Alpha Dream, we can see how not being bought out by Nintendo can and has had a negative effect on some of its studios. But that doesn't mean that Nintendo never buys studios, as in 2021, they bought Next Level Games. This studio is most well known for Luigi's Mansion 2 and 3, but are also the minds behind Mario Strikers. Why did Nintendo buy this studio instead of any of the others they could have bought? The only real reasoning given for this was that a lot of the studio's execs thought it was about time they sold their stocks and started seeking a potential purchasing offer. And after catching wind of this, Nintendo took one look at Mario Strikers Charged.
Now how could we be expected to do that?
Sold! Nintendo officially bought Next Level Games and brought them on board as a subsidiary. What has come of this deal?
And thus, Nintendo shall never buy another studio ever again.
You know, Next Level Games weren't the first studio to approach Nintendo with a buyout proposition, as once upon a time, Rareware approached Nintendo hoping for a buyout. Rareware is best known for the titles they made in partnership with Nintendo, most notably the Donkey Kong Country trilogy on SNES, Conga's Bad Fur Day, Perfect Dark, and of course, Banjo-Kazooie. Rare really helped establish a killer lineup for Nintendo's systems, and were the developers behind some of their console's best-selling games, and fans adored damn near everything they touched. Nintendo and Rareware were an unstoppable duo, so it may surprise you that when Rare asked Nintendo to purchase them, Nintendo said no. This is baffling to me. The reasoning Nintendo gave for not buying Rare was that they wanted to shift away from second-party developers. Lie, 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 jail. What the hell are you talking about? Even if this was the genuine reason why they didn't want to buy Rare, who gives a shit? They were topping your own in-house development teams when it comes to the quality of their releases and the frequency at which they came out. Why the hell wouldn't you want to keep them on board? So, with Nintendo leaving them out in the cold, Rareware ended up getting purchased by the undisputed king of the video game buyout. And nothing good ever came of it. Microsoft is a fiend when it comes to buying other studios. Hell, in the early days of the Xbox, they even tried to buy Nintendo and turn them into a strictly game development studio. And I'm sure we can all imagine how that went.
Oh, get the f*** out of here! Now,
this didn't work out for Microsoft, a surprise to absolutely nobody. And by the way, unrelated tangent alert! I see this idea thrown around a lot nowadays, that Nintendo would be better off as a third-party development studio rather than a console manufacturer, and I simply couldn't disagree more. From where I'm sitting, it makes absolutely no business sense for them to go third-party. They sell millions and millions of hardware units based on their first-party IPs alone. They would take massive losses as a third-party, mostly because because, as much as I adore Nintendo, I don't think their IP could survive in the Xbox ecosystem. They need their own platform to stay afloat. Sure, they'd have the benefit of more powerful hardware, and wouldn't have to set aside resources for console development, but I don't think they'd be raking in enough sales of their series to warrant being a third-party studio, or subsidiary to another studio. They need their own hardware. But they don't need Rareware, so after being humiliated by Nintendo's rejection of their buyout proposal, Microsoft ended up scooping up Rareware instead. This meant that all of Rare's original IP ended up becoming owned by Microsoft. Nintendo obviously kept Donkey Kong and Star Fox, but Banjo, Conker and the like, they were all under Microsoft's roof now. So, what did Microsoft do next? Nothing. Microsoft barely utilized Rareware as a studio. They had their mega few Kinect games, a remake of Conker's Bad Fur Day, Conker Live and Reloaded, the Rare Replay Collection, which didn't feature anything new, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, a game most fans of the series wish never happened, and Sea of Thieves. Would you consider that money well spent? All quality products, bar one, absolutely. But compared to what Rare had been pumping out previously, this just made them seem so underutilized. There are loads more examples of Microsoft buying up other studios, but for the rest of today's discussion, I just want to focus on 3 in particular, starting with Microsoft's acquisition of Mojang. I don't need to tell you who Mojang is, right? The studio behind everybody's favorite Minecraft. They were bought by Microsoft in 2014, and to me, the reasoning for this is perfectly clear. At first, I thought this was a pretty weird decision, seeing as Minecraft has continued to be released for every conceivable non-Xbox console since 2014. But then I started to think about it in terms of money. You see, prior to this acquisition, Microsoft would take a percentage of the sale for every copy of Minecraft sold on an Xbox console. But after the acquisition, Microsoft would take a percentage of the sale for every copy of Minecraft sold on any console. Publishing the game and owning the rights to the IP meant that Microsoft was able to make money from every individual purchased copy of Minecraft, not just those sold on their platforms. And considering the fact that Minecraft is the best-selling game of all time and saw an era of unprecedented growth around the time of this acquisition, this was definitely a wise move. And from what I can tell, Mojang still works with some independents, creating games they want to make, like Minecraft Dungeons and Minecraft Legends. In 2021, Microsoft shook the entire gaming industry when they bought Bethesda, creator of such beloved games as The Elder Scrolls and Fallout. Bethesda tended to make games for both Xbox and PlayStation, but with this buyout, things were about to change. Bethesda, like it or not, is one of the most influential developers in the entire industry, so to have them now be owned by Microsoft was a huge deal to say the very least. It was made clear early on that the team would continue to function basically as it always had. They'd finish up their current projects, including some they were contractually obliged to still release on PlayStation, or exclusively on PlayStation, and then they'd have the freedom to develop whatever they wanted. But after things were wrapped with Sony, pretty much all of their new releases would become Xbox exclusives. The biggest title to release under this exclusivity was Starfield, Bethesda's open-world space RPG that they spent 6 years teasing and 1 year actually showing gameplay of. This, I have to imagine, was a massive blow to Sony, but in some ways, this was their own fault. In June of 2023, The Verge revealed that a large reason behind the acquisition was talks of Starfield being a PlayStation exclusive. Sony has had a history of paying third-party studios to not release their games on Xbox, and Bethesda was no exception. In fact, the outstanding contractual obligations they had to take care of after the Microsoft acquisition were of that very nature, with Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo. So, after Sony had spent so long doing this, Microsoft decided enough was enough, and purchased Bethesda outright to stop this from ever happening again. And if you think Microsoft being able to make Bethesda's games exclusive would have a massive impact on Sony, how do you think Microsoft's acquisition of Activision would affect them? That's right. Not too long after they bought up Bethesda, Microsoft announced plans to buy one of, if not the biggest third-party developer on the face of the earth. Activision. For a brief rundown, Activision makes Call of Duty, they own King, who make Candy Crush, they own Blizzard, who makes Diablo and Overwatch, and so many more series, and all of them are Xbox properties now. This understandably was met with a lot of criticism, not just from PlayStation and its fans, but also from lawmakers. This deal has been contested by many countries due to the fear that this simply gives Microsoft an unfair advantage in the games market compared to Sony and Nintendo. Being able to make all of these games Xbox exclusives, alongside the games that are now exclusives thanks to Microsoft's purchases of other studios, would end up leaving Nintendo and Sony with no way to compete. Because of this concern, this acquisition has been contested for months and months, with Microsoft trying everything in their power to get the opposing countries on their side, most notably the UK. As if a country doesn't agree with Microsoft's purchase, they have the power to just cease business with the company entirely. So even though Microsoft now owns Activision, it's looking like they aren't going to have much in the way of exclusives from them, which'll make this more of a Mojang scenario for them, where they get a chunk of cash from each copy of a game sold on an opposing platform. But in my opinion, this purchase does also offer one other huge benefit: fixing Activision. Activision and their subsidiary Blizzard are an awful corporation. It's no secret by this point that there have been hundreds of reports of misconduct in the company, and every time a new report comes out, it's swept under the rug and the offenders get off scot-free. Employees have been abused, manipulated, and hurt, and the culture within the company showed no signs of improving. But with Microsoft now at the helm, there is potential for an entire, from the ground up restructuring of the company that helps alleviate this problem. Say what you will about Microsoft, but I don't think any of this would fly under their leadership, and now that they have the power to fix this company, I hope they do. So this ultimately brings us to one final question. Why buy out a video game studio in the first place? Well, the way I see it, yes, it can simply be a way for companies not to have to put much effort into making exclusive games on their own, and in a lot of cases, that's exactly what it is. But more often than not, it's just for the sake of making money. You buy a studio whose games are selling like crazy and take a chunk out of each sales profit. Or you buy a studio who makes games that everybody loves for another platform and make it so those people have to buy your platform to play them. You buy a studio that you have a really close partnership with before someone else nabs them and makes them stop making games with you. Or you be Nintendo and buy them out of fear.
Video game buyouts are a massive wildcard in the games industry that can massively shake up the way companies are run and games are released. But for us consumers, they aren't really all that significant. Best case scenario, a studio now has the funding to make more and more games. Worst case scenario, you have to buy a PlayStation to play a game you were really excited for, or just miss out on it. It stinks and isn't massively consumer friendly, but there are thousands of other games to play, man. Buyouts only really affect the business side of things, so as long as the company being bought out is utilized properly and still has the freedom to make whatever they want to make, then I don't see an issue with them. If nothing else, they make the industry a little bit more interesting. And when we now live in a world where Sonic the Hedgehog and the Red Angry Bird are under the same roof, the industry being a bit more interesting is the last f***ing thing we need.